The first time I noticed something was wrong, I was reaching up to adjust the projector screen in my classroom, and my arm caught in a way that made me stop mid-motion. Not pain, exactly. More like a pressure. A fullness under my left arm that hadn't been there the week before. I finished the lesson, waited until my students filed out for lunch, and stood alone by the window pressing my fingers into the soft hollow beneath my armpit. There was something there. Small, maybe the size of a grape. Firm, in a way that soft tissues shouldn't be firm. That evening, I showed my husband. He was sitting at the kitchen island, going through his emails, and I lifted my arm and guided his hand to the spot. He pressed once, briefly, then went back to his laptop. "You probably pulled something at the gym," he said. I hadn't been to the gym in 3 weeks. I told him that. "Then it's a cyst. People get cysts. My mother had one on her shoulder for 10 years. He closed the laptop halfway and looked at me with that expression I'd come to recognize over 8 years of marriage, the particular flatness that meant he'd already decided the conversation was over. "You're not going to spiral about this, are you?" I wasn't spiraling. I was standing in my own kitchen trying to tell my husband something felt wrong with my body. But I'd learned by then that there was very little distance between those two things in his mind. So I said no, I wasn't spiraling. I made dinner. I didn't mention it again that night. Over the next 3 weeks, I mentioned it 4 more times. Each time, I got a variation of the same response. It was a cyst. It was a pulled muscle. It was stress manifesting physically. I was a high school English teacher, after all, and it was October. And October meant midterms, and stress did things to the body. The 5th time I brought it up, my husband set down his fork and looked at me across the dinner table with something that wasn't quite patience anymore. "Claire," he said, using my name the way a parent uses a child's full name, "I need you to hear me. You have a tendency to fixate. We've talked about this." We had talked about it. 2 years earlier, I'd been convinced a mole on my back had changed shape. I'd gone to the dermatologist, had it checked, and it was nothing. The year before that, a headache that lasted 4 days had sent me to urgent care, where they told me I was dehydrated and gave me an IV bag and a mild suggestion to drink more water. My husband had been extraordinarily kind about both incidents in the moment. But kindness, I would learn, has a shelf life, and mine had apparently expired sometime in the past 18 months. "I'm not fixating," I said. "I can feel it when I put my arm down. Then maybe stop poking at it every 5 minutes." He picked his fork back up. "You make things worse by focusing on them." I didn't stop poking at it, because the grape had become a plum. By Thanksgiving, I was tired in a way that sleep didn't touch. I'd come home from school, sit down on the couch to grade papers, and wake up 2 hours later in the dark with the papers still in my lap and dinner unmade and my husband eating cereal standing over the sink, not saying anything, which was somehow worse than if he had. I'd started sweating through my clothes at night, not the mild warmth of a heavy blanket, but something drenching. Sheets soaked through by 3 in the morning, waking up cold and disoriented, and too exhausted to change the bedding. I lost 11 pounds between October and December without changing anything I ate. His mother noticed the weight loss first. She came for Thanksgiving and watched me move around the kitchen and said, in the tone she reserved for observations, she intended as compliments, "You've lost weight. Finally watching what you eat." I hadn't said anything to her about feeling unwell. I'd learned early in our marriage that his mother operated on a very simple interpretive system. Women who were sick were women seeking attention, and women seeking attention were women failing to adequately support the men in their lives. It wasn't cruelty, exactly. It was a worldview so completely formed that it had no gaps in it, no places where doubt could get in. After Thanksgiving, I started wearing cardigans over my blouses at school. The lump was visible now when I wore sleeveless tops, a slight asymmetry under my left arm that my colleague Rachel noticed one afternoon in the break room when I reached up to get my mug from the high shelf. "Claire," she said, and her voice had that particular quality that made me turn around. "What is that?" I told her everything. Standing in the faculty break room with the coffee maker going and papers stacked on the table, I told her about October and the grape and the plum and the 11 pounds and the sweating and the fatigue and my husband's face when I tried to talk about it. Rachel was a biology teacher. She had a practical, unsentimental relationship with the human body that I found, at that moment, more comforting than any amount of reassurance would have been. She didn't reassure me. She said, "That needs to be looked at." Today, if possible, I explained about the insurance. My husband and I were on his plan through his company, and our policy required a primary care referral for anything beyond a routine visit, and our primary care doctor had a 3-week wait for non-urgent appointments. And when I'd called to describe my symptoms, the nurse had triaged me as non-urgent and told me to call back if anything changed. Something has changed, Rachel said. Go to urgent care. Make them refer you. I went that Friday. The urgent care doctor examined the swelling, looked at my neck and my armpits and the area below my collarbone, and was quiet in a way that good doctors sometimes are when they're thinking very carefully about what to say next. He referred me to a specialist and wrote on the referral form, lymphadenopathy with constitutional symptoms, rule out lymphoma. He handed me the form and said, clearly and without softening it, that he wanted me to call the specialist first thing Monday morning. I showed my husband the referral that evening. I handed it to him and watched him read it and watched his face go through something I hadn't seen before. Not the flatness, not the impatience, but something faster and more complicated that resolved, within about 30 seconds, back into flatness. Rule out, he said. That means it's probably not. It means they don't know yet. They need to. Claire. He folded the paper and set it on the counter. The urgent care doctor saw you for what? 15 minutes. He doesn't know your history. He doesn't know that you have health anxiety. He said it gently. The way you say something you've said so many times it has become, in your mind, simply a fact about the world. I think before we start running down this particular road, we should talk to someone about why you keep ending up in these situations. I stared at him. What situations? Convinced something is seriously wrong. He looked at me with what I think he believed was compassion. I've been reading about somatic symptom disorder. The physical symptoms are real. I want you to know I'm not saying you're making them up, but the cause can be psychological. I've already reached out to Dr. Hennessy. Dr. Hennessy was a therapist. He was also the husband of my husband's college roommate, and they played golf together every other Sunday between April and November. I called the specialist on Monday. The earliest they could see me was 6 weeks out. I took the appointment and put it in my phone and didn't tell my husband because I had learned, over the past 3 months, that telling him things led to conversations I didn't have the energy for anymore. The appointment with Dr. Hennessy was a Wednesday evening. He was perfectly pleasant. He had a leather couch and a white noise machine outside his door, and a gentle, unhurried manner that might have been soothing under different circumstances. He asked me about my childhood, my relationship with my mother, my feelings about control. When I tried to describe the physical symptoms, the sweating, the weight loss, the swelling that was now the size of a golf ball, he listened carefully and said that the mind and body were deeply connected, and that physical symptoms could be the body's way of expressing distress that hadn't found another outlet. I asked him if he'd looked at the referral form. He said that wasn't really his domain. I left with a workbook about cognitive behavioral techniques for health anxiety and a follow-up appointment in 2 weeks. My husband was waiting in the car. He looked at me when I got in with an expression of such careful, practiced hope that I felt something in me go very quiet. How was it? He asked. Fine, I said. He reached over and squeezed my hand. I'm glad you went. I think this is going to help. I did not go back to Dr. Hennessy. But I also did not go to the specialist. Here is the part I am least proud of, and the part I have spent the most time trying to understand. I was a 34-year-old woman with a college degree and a professional salary and 8 years of living in the world as an adult, and I did not go to the specialist. I canceled the appointment 4 days before it was scheduled and did not reschedule. I want to say it was fear, but that's not entirely honest. It was something more corrosive than fear. It was the accumulated weight of being told, over and over, by someone whose opinion I had once valued above almost anyone else's, that my perception of my own body was not to be trusted. It was the way his certainty had colonized my own. By January, I was not sure what I actually felt and what I was catastrophizing. The two had become indistinguishable. Rachel noticed I hadn't rescheduled. She asked me directly, the way she did everything, standing in the hallway between third and fourth period, with her arms crossed and her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. I'm fine, I said. You've lost more weight. I've been busy. She looked at me for a long moment. Claire, I've been teaching next door to you for 6 years. You are not fine, and I need you to hear me say that I am not your husband. I went home that day and stood in front of the bathroom mirror and made myself look, really look, without the cardigan, The asymmetry was pronounced now. You could see it with both arms down. A fullness on the left side that had no mirror on the right. I was thinner than I'd ever been as an adult, and not in a way that looked healthy. My collarbones stood out in a way that hadn't been true in October. There were shadows under my eyes that 11 hours of sleep didn't touch. I called to reschedule the specialist appointment the next morning. They couldn't see me for another 5 weeks. I was not going to make it 5 weeks. As it turned out, it was a Tuesday in February. 5th period, Junior AP English. We were doing a close reading of a passage from Beloved, and I was writing a quote on the whiteboard. And somewhere between the first word and the last word, the classroom tilted. Not dramatically, I didn't fall. I just became aware that the floor was at a slightly different angle than it had been a moment ago, and that the marker in my hand was very heavy, and that the voices of 22 17-year-olds had taken on a distant, underwater quality. I turned around slowly and must have looked wrong in some way I wasn't aware of, because the girl in the front row, a student named Brianna, stood up partway from her seat and said, "Mrs. Harmon, are you okay?" I opened my mouth to say yes, and the classroom tilted the other direction. And then I was on the floor. I didn't lose consciousness, not fully. I was aware of Brianna's voice, very loud now, calling for help. I was aware of the classroom door opening and running feet in the hallway. I was aware of Rachel's voice above me, steady and clear, and her hand on my wrist checking my pulse, and her saying to someone to call 911 and to someone else to get the students out of the room. I lay on the cold linoleum and stared at the ceiling tiles and thought, with extraordinary clarity, I knew something was wrong. The emergency room. Tests. A CT scan and an ultrasound and blood work that came back with numbers the resident explained to me carefully, watching my face. My husband arrived 30 minutes after Rachel called him. His mother came with him. They stood in the doorway of the exam bay, my husband pale and tight-jawed, his mother's hand on his arm, and waited while the attending physician, a woman named Dr. Reyes, with short hair and very direct eyes, explained what they'd found. Stage 3, Hodgkin's lymphoma. The primary mass under my left arm. Involvement of the lymph nodes in my neck, my chest, and the region below my diaphragm. A disease that had been growing. By the evidence of the imaging and the pathology she'd already ordered from the biopsy they'd done that afternoon, for somewhere between 9 and 12 months. My husband said nothing for a very long time. His mother said, "But she seemed fine at Thanksgiving." Dr. Reyes looked at her. Then she looked at me. "When did you first notice symptoms?" "October," I said. "The lump. And the fatigue and the night sweats a few weeks after." She made a note. Her pen moved with a kind of deliberateness that I would come to understand, in the days that followed, was not neutral. "You have good odds," she told me, and she said it to me, not to the two people in the doorway. "Hodgkin's has an excellent response rate to treatment, caught at stage 1 or 2. We're talking over 90% long-term survival. At stage 3, we're at 75% with standard protocols. But I want to be honest with you. 4 months ago, this conversation would have been different. October, November, December, January, February. 4 months, during which a grape had become a golf ball, had become something wrapped around my lymphatic system, like ivy around a trellis. My husband moved closer to the bed. His face had done something complicated that I couldn't read. "Why didn't you tell me it was this serious?" he asked. I looked at him. I thought about the referral form folded on the kitchen counter. I thought about Dr. Hennessy's white noise machine. I thought about the words spiral, and the words health anxiety, and the workbook still sitting in my nightstand unread. "I did," I said. He opened his mouth, and Dr. Reyes said, very calmly, "I'm going to need to ask both of you to step out, so I can continue the examination." His mother said something on her way out, low enough that I could almost pretend I hadn't heard it. Something about how at least now we'd know what was really going on. As if the past 4 months had been a question rather than an answer I'd been trying to give them. The oncologist I was assigned to, Dr. Vasquez, was a small man with enormous hands and the kind of focused attention that made you feel, when he was talking to you, like you were the only patient he'd ever had. He reviewed everything: the imaging, the pathology, the blood work, and something else, my medical records, which he'd requested and received within 24 hours. He came to see me on my second day in the hospital and brought the records with him. I want to ask you something, he said, and I want you to know that this is not about assigning blame. This is about understanding the clinical timeline so we can give you the best possible care. He opened the folder. Your urgent care visit in November. The referral was written. You canceled the specialist appointment. Can you tell me what happened? I told him. I told him everything, my husband. The folded referral, Dr. Hennessy, the CBT workbook, the way certainty, when someone applies it to you consistently enough, starts to feel like truth. I talked for a long time. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, constitutional symptoms, the night sweats, the unexplained weight loss, the fatigue alongside lymphadenopathy, these are not subtle findings. These are textbook presentation. Any physician who examined you would have recognized the urgency. He paused. The urgent care physician did recognize it. That's why he wrote the referral the way he did. My husband thought it was anxiety. Your husband, Dr. Vasquez, said carefully, is not a physician. He documented everything. The timeline, the referral, the cancellation, the visit to Dr. Hennessy, whose notes, Dr. Vasquez also requested, and which showed clearly that a therapist had been treating me for health anxiety during a period when a biopsy would have revealed a malignancy. He documented the 11 pounds of weight loss that appeared nowhere in any of my medical records because no physician had seen me during those months. He documented it all with the care of someone who understood that documentation was not paperwork but evidence, and that evidence was a form of protection. My husband came to see me every day. He brought flowers the first time, and then when I didn't respond to the flowers the way he seemed to expect, he came empty-handed and sat in the chair by the bed and talked about treatment timelines and insurance and the logistics of my leave of absence from school. He did not say he was sorry. He said he hoped I understood that he had only been trying to help me break a pattern of catastrophizing, and that no one could have known. Dr. Vasquez had reviewed the records. Someone could have known in October. Someone had known in November. The urgent care doctor had put it in writing. His sister came on the 4th day. She was the one person in his family I had ever genuinely liked, practical and dry, and without any of her mother's talent for decorative cruelty. She sat down next to the bed and looked at me for a long time without saying anything. Then she reached into her bag and put her phone on the blanket in front of me. I started saving things about 6 weeks ago, she said. After Christmas dinner. You don't remember, but you got up to get more water, and my brother said something about you. She stopped. I started saving things after that. The recordings were 4 of them. My husband's voice, clear and recognizable, telling his sister over the phone that the lymph node thing was exactly the kind of pattern he'd been dealing with for years. My husband at a family dinner saying that Claire's relationship with her body was honestly one of the most exhausting things about their marriage. My husband telling his mother, sometime in January, that he'd gotten her into therapy and hopefully that would put an end to this cycle once and for all. His mother's voice in response, agreeing, adding that some women just needed that kind of attention and the important thing was not to give it to them. I listened to all 4 recordings twice. Then I looked at his sister. He doesn't know you have these. I said. No, she said. And I don't care if you use them or don't use them. I just needed you to have them. Rachel came every other day. She brought real food soup from the place 2 blocks from school that I loved. Bread from the bakery on Elm. The kind of practical nourishment that has no subtext. She sat with me while I had my first chemotherapy infusion and talked about her students and the broken projector in her classroom and the new department head's obsession with data-driven lesson planning. Ordinary things, the fabric of the world I'd been living in when this started, still existing, still waiting for me. The social worker assigned to my case was the one who first mentioned the legal dimension. She sat down with me one afternoon and explained, in the careful language of someone who has had this conversation before, that there were situations in which a patient's access to medical care had been impeded by someone with authority over their insurance or their financial situation, and that those situations had legal remedies. My husband controlled our joint finances. When I'd tried to pay out of pocket for an urgent care visit in December after the canceled specialist appointment, before I gave up entirely, I'd realized that the money in our checking account was lower than I'd thought it should be. When I'd mentioned it, he'd said we'd had a big month with the holidays. I hadn't pushed. I got a lawyer. He was young and thorough, and he read Dr. Vasquez's documentation and his sister's recordings and my medical records and the urgent care referral, and said, "This is a case. Do you want to make it one? My husband did not take it well. His response, communicated through his own lawyer, was that I was exploiting a medical crisis to punish him for trying to support my mental health. He sent a single text message directly to me, the night after I filed, that said, "I can't believe you're doing this to our family." I read it 3 times. Then I put my phone face down on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling of my hospital room and thought about October, about a Tuesday morning in my classroom, and a cold linoleum floor, and Brianna's voice saying my name. About 11 pounds and 4 months, and a referral folded on a kitchen counter, and a therapist who was not looking for cancer because his mandate had been to convince me I was afraid of my own imagination. The chemotherapy worked. It worked the way it works when it's given time to work, not perfectly, not without cost, but enough. 6 months of treatment, then a PET scan, then 6 more months, then another scan. By the time the case was settled, I had been declared in remission for 4 months. The settlement covered my medical costs, my lost income during treatment, and damages that my lawyer argued, and a mediator agreed, reflected the measurable harm of a 7-month delay in diagnosis. My husband and I divorced. The house was sold. His mother sent a card through his lawyer that contained no apology, only an expression of hope that I would find peace. I read it standing in the parking lot of my oncologist's office and then put it in the trash can by the door. His sister called me the week the settlement was finalized. She asked how I was. "Better," I said. "Good," she said. And then, "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner." I told her what I believed, which was that she hadn't had anything to say sooner. She'd started watching when she noticed something was wrong, and she'd kept what she'd seen, and she'd given it to me when I needed it. That's not a failure. That's someone doing the best they could from where they were standing. Rachel came to my last chemotherapy infusion. She brought the soup and the bread and a card signed by my entire junior AP English class, 22 signatures in different colored pen, with a note at the bottom from Brianna that said, "We learned about foreshadowing this year. I think you were the most important lesson. I teach part-time now, 3 classes instead of 5, because fatigue is still something I manage on the back end of treatment, though it has gotten better and the doctors say it will keep getting better. I go to a support group on Thursday evenings at the hospital, not the cancer support group, though I've been to those too, but a group for women who delayed medical care because of circumstances at home. They come from different situations. Some of them were told, like I was, that their symptoms were anxiety. Some of them were told they were being dramatic, or overreacting, or ungrateful. Some of them were told nothing at all, just encountered doors that closed quietly, over and over, until they stopped looking for an opening. We don't compare our stories as a competition. We compare them the way you compare maps, looking for the streets that keep appearing, the patterns that tell you something about the terrain. Dr. Vasquez spoke at a continuing education conference last fall about the clinical presentation of constitutional symptoms and barriers to timely diagnosis. He cited my case, anonymized, as an example. He told me afterward that the response from other physicians had been significant, not surprise, exactly, but recognition. The kind of recognition that comes when someone names something that has been happening in silence. I have my scans every 6 months now. I sit in the waiting room with a book and a coffee, and I am, most of the time, at peace with the uncertainty. The body holds its own counsel. What I know now, with a certainty I didn't have at 34, is that when my body speaks to me, I will listen. I will not wait for someone else to give me permission to believe what I feel. That October, when I pressed my fingers into the hollow of my armpit and felt something that shouldn't have been there, I was right. I was right in November when I handed my husband a referral and said this matters. I was right in December and January, and every morning I woke up, soaked and exhausted, and tried to find language for something that was happening inside my own body. I was right the whole time. The disease was never in my head. Though by the time anyone looked, it had gotten close enough that it barely mattered. My husband thought he was protecting me from my own anxiety. What he was actually doing was protecting himself from the inconvenience of having a wife whose body was telling the truth. Those are not the same thing. I spent a long time being unable to tell them apart. I don't have that problem anymore. If you are reading this from somewhere in that confusion, if someone in your life has handed you their certainty about your own body and told you to carry it instead of your own, I want to say clearly, put it down. Go to the doctor. Go to the free clinic, the urgent care, the school nurse, The friend who has a practical and unsentimental relationship with the human body and will tell you what she actually thinks. Your symptoms do not require anyone's permission to be real. They were real in October. They will be real whenever you're reading this. Don't wait for a seizure. Don't wait for a classroom floor. Don't wait for someone else to finally look at what you've been pointing to for months. The cost of being believed too late is something you pay for the rest of your life. I know because I'm still paying it in scan anxiety and fatigue and the specific loneliness of having learned, at 34 years old, that the person who shared my bed could not be trusted with my pain. But I'm alive to pay it. And some mornings, standing in front of my students with a marker in my hand and the whole long day ahead of me, that feels like more than enough.